Save me. Take me with you. 4 Apache widow pleads to a lone human, but he took all of them. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The afternoon sun hung low over the high desert as Elias guided his horse along a narrow ridge, his boots scraping against loose stones that shifted under each step, and the air carried that dry heaviness that warned an experienced traveler of trouble nearby. He paused often, not because he was tired, but because he had learned across years of scouting that small details revealed the shape of danger long before people did. A broken stalk of brush, a faint dust trail drifting upward, a silence that didn't match the time of day. These were things he noticed automatically. Elias was a man in his early 40s, tall and lean from long weeks on foot, his skin darkened by sun and wind, his beard untrimmed and streaked with early gray. He had worked as a civilian guide for military columns years earlier, watching more destruction than he could justify to himself, and the guilt from those years followed him even after he walked away from that world. Since then, he kept moving, following the loneliest paths, avoiding towns unless he needed supplies. His goal was simple: stay unnoticed, cause no harm, and keep his mind steady by staying in motion. Today, though, the land ahead felt wrong. A thin column of smoke rose far beyond a dry basin, too unfocused to belong to a normal campfire. Elias straightened, tightening the straps on his saddle. Smoke that faint usually meant someone had tried to hide it, or someone had forced it out quickly. Both possibilities troubled him. He pressed on, navigating the slope until the ground leveled and the smell of burned wood drifted toward him. The remains of a small camp came into view. A broken lean-to collapsed inward, ashes still warm in the fire pit, clay pots shattered across the ground, and soft indentations in the dirt that suggested a struggle. He knelt beside the ashes and pressed 2 fingers into the center. Heat clung to the surface. The fire had been put out only a few hours ago. Elias rose slowly, scanning the ridges on both sides. His breath tightened as he tried to piece together what had happened. The footprints scattered around the camp told him enough. Heavy boot tracks mixed with bare feet, some small, some clearly dragged. Whatever had occurred, it had been fast and violent. A faint rustle reached him from the far edge of the ruins. Not a threat. The sound lacked urgency. It sounded like someone trying not to collapse. Elias stepped forward cautiously, hands open, his stance steady but non-threatening. 4 women emerged from behind a half-burned shelter, their bodies stiff with exhaustion and fear. They didn't run. They didn't raise their hands. They simply watched him, trying to read whether this stranger was another danger or something else entirely. The first woman stood slightly ahead of the others. Her name came out clearly: Ayanna. She had long braids down her back, dust covering the sleeves of her worn deerskin dress. Her posture suggested she had taken on responsibility for the others, even if she wasn't sure how much strength she had left. Next came a smaller movement from behind her. Nita, the second woman said quietly. Her hands were wrapped in cloth, her breathing unsteady, and her eyes drifted toward the broken camp as if expecting someone to return. She looked like she had held herself together all morning and was running out of strength. A third woman kept distance between herself and Elias, her gaze sharp and alert. Sana. Her eyes tracked every movement around them, her jaw tight, her stance braced. She didn't trust him yet, not because of anything he had done, but because too many men had given her reason not to trust any stranger. The last woman stepped forward in a slow, steady way. Yara. Her build was strong, her hands scarred from years of work, and she stood closest to Nita, ready to support her if she faltered. She had a calmness that told Elias she had been someone's anchor long before this day. Elias nodded once, acknowledging them, but he didn't introduce himself. He didn't know whether sharing his name would help them or make things harder. What he did know was that there were no men here, no horses tethered nearby, no sign of protection returning to this camp. The tracks leading away told him the men had been taken or killed. The women had been left behind, possibly on purpose, possibly not, but staying here meant death. Ayanna held his gaze. Her expression didn't break. "We cannot remain," she said. Her voice wasn't pleading. It was the tone of someone stating a fact she had already accepted. Yara glanced toward the ridge. "They may return," she said. "Not for us. For anything they think we hid." Her hands tightened slightly, not in fear, but in readiness. Sana's chest rose sharply as she tried to keep her breath even. Her eyes flickered to Elias, then back to the horizon. She didn't trust him, but she understood the reality of being left at a destroyed camp with no supplies. Nita shifted her weight and winced. She was trying not to show weakness, but it was clear she couldn't walk far alone. Elias felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Stress mixed with anger he kept buried. He knew what had happened here. He had seen too many destroyed camps during his service, too many families broken apart by raids or military patrols or desperate men searching for food and power. He also knew he had no authority to order these women anywhere, nor did he want the burden of deciding their fate. But leaving them here wasn't an option he could live with. He turned away from the fire pit and adjusted his horse's saddle, making sure the cinch was secure. He didn't say a word. He started walking north, choosing the path that offered the most cover from the ridges. He left enough space between himself and the women so they could choose freely. His steps were steady, his breathing even, though inside he felt a weight settling, a weight that meant he wouldn't be traveling alone anymore. Behind him, he heard movement. Ayana's footsteps came first, firm but measured. Then Yara's, steady and deliberate. Then Sana's lighter steps, cautious but committed. Nita's breath came last, strained but determined. Elias didn't turn around, but he felt the shift immediately. For people had decided to trust him with their survival, at least for now. He didn't know if he would fail them. He didn't know if danger was still following them. He only knew he couldn't leave them behind. The sun slipped lower as the group moved away from the ruined camp, the ground changing from scattered debris to open desert. The wind picked up slightly, pushing dust across their path. Elias kept his eyes forward, navigating each rock and ridge, aware of every sound behind him. For the first time in years, he wasn't walking for himself. He was walking because 4 women had no place left to go. And whether he admitted it or not, that responsibility changed everything. The heat began to fade as the sun lowered behind a line of distant mesas, leaving the desert with a colder bite than the women seemed prepared for. Elias led the way through a shallow cut between 2 ridges where the wind dropped and the ground grew firmer. And for the first time since leaving the ruined camp, he allowed himself to slow enough to listen to the people behind him. Their footsteps were uneven. Nita stumbled every few minutes, catching herself with a quiet inhale she tried to hide. Sana walked slightly apart from the others, her eyes tracking every shift in the landscape. Ayana focused on keeping them together without saying a word. Yara remained at the rear, watching Nita closely in case she fell. Elias kept moving because stopping too early meant giving fear a chance to settle, and he knew they needed distance before resting. Yet each time Nita's pace faltered, he felt a pull of responsibility heavier than he expected. By the time shadows stretched long across the ground, he found a narrow hollow shielded by rock on 3 sides. It was quiet, dry, and out of sight from the open trail, enough safety for one night. "We'll stop here," he said, his voice low but firm. He rarely gave instructions, but tonight there was no room for hesitation. The women stepped inside the hollow one by one. Nita eased herself down near a flat rock and exhaled sharply as she tried to unbind the cloth around her hands. Ayana knelt beside her, inspecting the swelling on her wrists, and a faint tremor crossed her face, frustration mixed with fear, but she didn't speak it aloud. Yara began gathering small pieces of wood that had blown against the rock wall, her movements steady despite her exhaustion. Sana remained near the entrance, scanning the ridgeline as if expecting movement at any moment. Elias unsaddled his horse, letting the animal graze on sparse brush while he checked the ground for any sign of previous camps. His instincts stayed tight, the same instincts that had kept him alive through years of escorting others across hostile land. As he worked, he caught fragments of quiet conversation behind him. Ayana guiding Nita to adjust her bandages, Yara offering water, Sana reminding them to stay near the rock face where shadows provided cover. When Elias returned to the group, he set his canteen in the center of the hollow, without comment. Ayana looked at him with a steady expression, reading the gesture for what it was, an acknowledgement that they were all sharing whatever they had, even if none of them felt entirely safe. "We need a fire," Yara said, her voice low to avoid echo. Just enough to warm her. She nodded toward Nita, who had begun shivering even though the air was only just cooling. Elias hesitated. Fire meant visibility. Smoke could draw attention. But leaving Nita cold would slow them tomorrow, and slowing tomorrow would put all of them at risk. After a long breath, he gathered a small cluster of wood and arranged it beneath an overhang to hide the light. He struck a spark with practiced hands, controlling the flame until it grew just high enough to give warmth without casting far. Sana shifted uneasily. "Light makes us easier to find." Elias met her glare without challenge. "She won't make the next day without heat." Sana didn't argue further, but her tension didn't soften. Ayana watched the exchange with a quiet calculation. She studied Elias as he adjusted the fire, noticing the restraint in his movements and the lack of hesitation when he made a difficult decision. For a moment her expression eased, though she covered it quickly. As the fire settled into a low, steady burn, Yara offered the first piece of dried meat from the small pouch she had carried from the camp. She handed it to Elias without ceremony, expecting him to take it or refuse it honestly. He accepted it, dividing it into smaller pieces and setting them out for everyone before taking any for himself. The women exchanged brief glances, surprised, cautious, reassured in different ways. Nita ate slowly, keeping her gaze lowered. She looked up only once, when Elias placed a blanket from his saddle across her legs. The surprise in her eyes was sharp enough that she didn't hide it quickly. "I don't need. It's cold," he said simply. She nodded once and didn't argue again. As darkness thickened around the hollow, the group began to settle. Ayana leaned against the rock wall, her breath evening out after hours of tension. Yara sat beside the fire, keeping watch over the low flames. Sana stayed near the entrance, refusing rest, even when exhaustion pulled at her shoulders. Nita curled near the warmth, wincing each time she shifted her hands. Elias remained a short distance away, sitting with his knees drawn up, his rifle across his lap. His eyes stayed fixed on the narrow opening of the hollow, tracking every sound. Wind moving through brush, small stones shifting on a ridge, the slow steps of his grazing horse. He didn't expect sleep, not with strangers relying on him, not with the possibility of riders returning. His thoughts circled briefly, touching on the unease he'd felt at the camp, the way Nita trembled, the way Sana flinched at every noise, the way Ayana held herself like someone who had no room left for mistakes. He didn't understand why the four had survived when others hadn't, but he understood their fear without needing explanations. As the night grew colder, Ayana spoke in a quiet tone meant only for Elias. "Why did you stop for us?" He didn't look at her. "You were still alive." That's not reason enough for most men. It is for me. She studied him for several seconds, then nodded once and didn't ask anything else. The fire crackled softly. The women shifted into uneasy rest. The wind moved across the entrance but didn't push inside. Elias kept watch until the stars turned bright overhead, knowing tomorrow would bring new dangers and decisions he hadn't planned to make, and knowing he had already accepted a responsibility he couldn't walk away from anymore. The first light crept into the hollow as a pale line along the rock wall, waking Elias before the others stirred. His back was stiff from sitting upright all night, but he pushed himself to his feet without a sound, checking the rifle and scanning the ridge that overlooked their shelter. Nothing moved. The wind was still low. The night had passed quietly, yet something in the silence bothered him. It was too controlled, as though the land itself was holding its breath. He stepped outside the hollow, letting the cool air settle around him. The ground showed faint impressions from where the women had walked the day before, but what caught his attention was a single new mark, fresh, shallow, and separate from their own trail. Someone had ridden through the area late in the night. The hoofprint pointed east. Only one horse. Slow pace. Not scouting passively, but moving with intent. Elias crouched and lowered his hand to the dirt, feeling the edges of the print. It hadn't been made more than 2 hours earlier. Behind him, loose gravel shifted softly. Ayana approached with careful steps, her braids falling over her shoulder. "You see something?" she asked, voice low. "One rider," he said, "close enough to hear us if we made noise." Her jaw tightened, looking for survivors. Elias didn't confirm it aloud, but the possibility was obvious. Whoever had destroyed the camp might not be finished. Back inside the hollow, Yara was helping Nita sit upright, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. The pain in Nita's wrists had worsened overnight, her movements slower and less controlled. Sana stood near the entrance again, one hand pressed against the rock, already alert despite the lack of sleep. "We need to move," Elias said as he stepped inside. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush them, but the urgency in his tone was unmistakable. Ayana immediately began gathering what few supplies they carried. Yara checked Nita's bindings and helped her to her feet. Sana kept her eyes fixed on Elias, waiting for more information. "Riders?" she asked. "One. Not far." She swallowed hard but nodded. Elias saddled his horse quickly, tightening the cinch and securing the rifle. His mind shifted into the old pattern he had tried to bury, calculating routes, measuring distances, weighing risks. He hated how easily it returned, but today it kept them alive. As the group moved out of the hollow, Nita stumbled. Yara steadied her with a firm grip around her arm. Elias slowed his pace enough to keep them from falling behind. The trail ahead angled between two ridges that led toward a narrow canyon, a place where the wind masked sound and where footprints disappeared under hard stone. He chose that path because it gave them a chance to vanish before the rider found their campsite. They walked in silence for nearly half an hour until the ridge line widened and the ground leveled. Elias stopped abruptly and raised his hand. The women froze behind him. Across the sand, a second set of tracks crossed their path, lighter, uneven, and unfamiliar. Ayana stepped beside Elias, studying the marks. "Not horses," she murmured. "Footprints," he said. "Small strides. Someone running." Yara crouched carefully, tracing one print without touching it. "Child." Elias shook his head. "Too wide. Could be someone injured." Sana's breathing quickened. "From our camp." "Possible," Elias answered, though he didn't believe it. The direction was wrong. Whoever made these prints had come from the opposite side of the ridge, heading southwest with no clear destination. Ayana looked at Elias, waiting for his judgment. He scanned the horizon again, tension building in his chest. "We stay on our course. If we follow every sign, we'll lose the distance we need." The women didn't argue. They fell back into formation, each one adjusting to the pace that kept them protected without exhausting Nita further. By midday, the heat grew sharp again. Yara handed the canteen to Nita in short intervals. Sana rotated between scouting ahead and watching the back trail. Ayana kept close to Elias, gauging how alert he was, reading the small changes in his expression. As they neared the canyon mouth, Elias slowed once more. A thin trail of ash ran across the ground as if someone had carried burning wood from one place to another. It stretched toward a cluster of rocks that formed a natural barrier. The ash was still dark, not yet faded by wind. Ayana approached cautiously. "This wasn't here yesterday." "Someone camped nearby," Elias said. "Not long." Sana's hands clenched. "How many?" "One or two," he replied. "But they were close." The tension among the women rose immediately. Yara moved nearer to Nita, shielding her with her body. Ayana scanned every opening in the rocks. Sana reached instinctively for a stone she could use if needed, though she kept it hidden at her side. Elias stepped forward alone, climbing onto a flat boulder to look deeper into the canyon. His heart thudded faster than he liked. Not out of panic, but from the pressure of knowing he was responsible for people who had no other protection. He didn't see movement. No embers. No supplies. Whoever had been there had already gone. He climbed down and faced the women. "We enter the canyon," he said. "The stone hides our trail. If they circle behind us, they won't find tracks to follow." Nita drew a slow breath, bracing herself. Yara nodded once, steady and willing. Sana tightened her grip on the stone before slipping it quietly into her belt. Ayana looked at Elias with a seriousness that matched his own. "We trust your lead," she said. Elias felt the weight of those words settle heavily. Trust was something he hadn't carried in years, and now 4 lives depended on his judgment. He didn't speak, but a quiet resolve formed in him. He would keep them alive, even if it meant confronting the past he had tried to outrun. Together, they stepped into the canyon, the walls rising high on both sides, the light dimming as if the land were closing behind them. It was the first moment Elias understood that their journey had already changed direction, not just geographically, but in ways he couldn't yet name. The canyon walls rose higher the farther they walked, cutting away most of the morning light and replacing it with a cool stillness that settled over the group like a thin layer of tension. Elias moved at the front, stepping carefully along uneven stone where footprints couldn't form, and the women followed close enough to stay together, but far enough to keep from crowding on narrow ledges. The air inside the canyon carried a low echo, magnifying every small sound. Pebbles rolling under a boot, fabric brushing rock, Nita's strained breathing as she tried to hide her discomfort. Elias paused at the first bend and studied the canyon floor. No fresh tracks, no ash, no marks of anyone traveling through recently. The silence was complete in a way that made him uneasy. Natural quiet was one thing. An absence of small animal noise meant something was off. He scanned the walls carefully, searching for loose rock, signs of movement, or places where someone might be hiding. Nothing gave itself away, but the feeling didn't lift. Ayana reached his side, her eyes following his line of sight. "Trouble?" she asked. "Not yet," he answered, "but stay close." Behind them, Yara adjusted Nita's wrap again, securing it firmer so she could walk without leaning too heavily. Sana stayed to the rear, turning her head every few steps to check if anyone had entered behind them. Her shoulders held a tightness that hadn't eased since dawn. The canyon narrowed abruptly, forcing them to walk single file along a shelf barely wide enough for a person and a pack animal. Elias slowed and placed a hand against the rock to check its stability before signaling for the others to follow. The horse stepped carefully, nostrils flaring as if it also sensed the tension pressed into the stone. Halfway across the narrow shelf, they heard it, a distant clatter of rocks falling somewhere beyond the bend. Everyone froze. The sound wasn't loud, but it was sudden and unnatural. Sana gripped the stone at her side, her breath catching in her throat. "Someone's here," she whispered. Elias focused on the direction of the echo, considering distance, weight, and angle. After a moment, he shook his head slightly. "Not footsteps," he said quietly. "Something slipped. Maybe an animal. Maybe," Ayana replied, though doubt remained in her eyes. They continued forward. At the end of the narrow pass, the canyon opened into a wide basin sheltered by high stone walls. The ground here was more forgiving, covered in fine gravel and patches of tall grass that shifted slightly when wind slipped through overhead gaps. It was the first safe place they had found since dawn, though the safety felt uncertain. "We'll rest here," Elias said. His voice was calm, but the weight behind it was deliberate. He needed time to read the canyon properly. Yara guided Nita to a smooth section of rock where she could sit without straining her wrists. Ayana began checking the area for usable branches or dry brush, though she didn't expect to find much in a rocky basin. Sana continued walking the perimeter with measured steps, scanning the canyon walls for movement. Elias knelt beside a patch of disturbed gravel near the wall. Someone had dug a shallow hole recently, small, precise, hidden from the basin's center. He cleared the loose gravel with his fingers. Inside lay a single broken arrow shaft. Not military, not a design he recognized from the women's camp. Someone else had been here. Someone who knew how to hide signs. Ayana approached quietly, noting the tension in his posture before she saw the arrow. "Who would leave that?" she asked. "Someone watching this trail," he said. "Could be a scout." Could be a hunter. Hard to tell. And now they know we passed through. Maybe, Elias replied, though the uncertainty unsettled him. He covered the shallow hole again so the women wouldn't worry more than necessary. But when he stood, Sana was already watching him with narrowed eyes. She had noticed the disturbed gravel, even if she hadn't seen the arrow beneath. "What did you find?" she asked. "Something old," Elias said. "Not a threat to us now." Sana didn't look convinced, but she didn't press further. The group settled around the basin while Elias climbed one of the lower rock shelves to get a better view. The climb was short, but it offered a sweeping angle over both the route they had entered from and the opposite side of the canyon. His stomach tightened when he saw a faint cloud of dust far beyond the canyon mouth. Someone was traveling in their direction. Slow, purposeful, steady. One rider. He descended quickly but calmly, not wanting to stir panic. "A rider's coming," he said quietly to Ayana first. "Far enough we have time, but close enough they'll reach the canyon by afternoon." Ayana's breath steadied as she weighed the information. "We can't outrun horses with Nita hurt," she said. "No," Elias agreed, "but we can make it harder for them to track us." He stepped toward the group. "We'll leave the canyon through the north wall. There's a narrow climb that leads to open ridges. Hard trail, better for losing tracks." Sana's expression shifted, fear mixing with readiness. "Show us," she said. Before they moved, Elias crouched beside Nita. "You can climb if we take it slow?" Nita nodded once, determined even through pain. "I'll manage." Yara tightened her grip on Nita's arm. "She won't fall." Elias led them to the far end of the basin where a thin, steep path snaked upward between boulders. It wasn't a trail meant for travelers. It was something created by runoff and time. But it offered a way out without leaving prints behind. One by one they climbed, Elias at the front, Yara supporting Nita, Ayana steadying them from behind, and Sana covering their rear. The wind increased at higher elevation, carrying dust away from the basin and erasing signs of their presence. When they finally reached the ridge top, the land stretched wide and harsh before them. No cover, no clear path, only miles of uneven terrain leading into foothills Elias had traveled years earlier. Ayana looked at him. "Where now?" Elias pointed toward the distant line of scrub trees. "Toward water, toward ground that doesn't tell our story at a glance." Sana scanned the horizon behind them. "Will the rider find our trail?" Elias answered honestly. "They'll try." He started walking. The women followed. Above them, the sky widened, the air cooled, and the reality of being hunted settled deeper into their steps. Yet for the first time, Elias felt a resolve forming not out of duty, but out of something closer to loyalty. He wasn't guiding strangers anymore. He was leading people who trusted him to keep them alive. The ridge carried them farther from the canyon until the land shifted into a rolling stretch of pale scrub and scattered stone, and each step felt heavier than the last. The wind grew warmer again, brushing grit against their faces, and Nita's breathing grew shallow as she leaned more against Yara's steady support. Elias slowed the pace without saying so, adjusting his steps to match the weakest among them. The open terrain made him anxious. There was nothing to hide behind, no shade, no cover if the rider found their trail. But moving fast would break Nita, and leaving her behind was something none of them would accept. Not even Sana, who hid her worry behind sharp vigilance. A faint line of darker green appeared ahead, barely visible unless someone knew what to look for. Elias recognized it immediately. Trees gathering around a seasonal water pocket. It wasn't a reliable source, but it was shelter enough to regroup and plan their next move. He motioned toward the direction with a small gesture of his hand. "There," he said. "Water and shade. Not much, but enough." Ayana nodded, tension easing slightly around her eyes. Yara adjusted her grip on Nita, determined to keep her from stumbling through the last stretch. Sana's gaze swept across the horizon repeatedly, checking for movement, and the tightness in her jaw stayed fixed no matter how many times she saw nothing. When they reached the small grove of bent cottonwoods, the air cooled under the leaves. A shallow pool lay half hidden between rocks, the water clear but still, No tracks around it except for a single set Elias detected immediately. Small, spaced unevenly, as if someone had approached in a hurry and kept their weight off one leg. The footprints were too old to be the rider. Someone different had been here. Someone traveling alone. Elias crouched near the prince, his expression tightening. Ayana lowered herself beside him. "Child," she asked. "No," he said quietly. "Foot is too long. Step is too light for a man. Woman, possibly, and injured." Ayana looked toward the direction the tracks led, northwest, deeper into uninhabited land. "She went alone." "Yes," Elias said, "and she hasn't returned." Before Ayana could respond, Nita sank onto a patch of grass near the water, exhaustion overtaking her careful posture. Yara gently loosened the bandages at her wrist, allowing the air to touch swollen skin. Nita's wince was sharp, but she didn't pull away. She was reaching the edge of what she could endure. Sana stepped forward suddenly, tension cutting through her voice. "Is the rider close?" "Not yet," Elias said, "but he'll reach the canyon soon. Once he sees our trail vanish, he may try circling. And if he tracks us here, then we move again," he answered. "But not until Nita can stand without falling." Sana opened her mouth to argue, then closed it when she looked at Nita's shaking hands. She turned away instead, positioning herself between the trees and the open ridge. Elias retrieved the canteen and filled it with the cool water. He passed it first to Nita, who drank slowly, her breath calming as she swallowed. Yara waited patiently, then drank second. Ayana took her turn and handed the canteen back with a small nod, an acknowledgement of shared need. Elias didn't drink until last. When he finally sat, the ground felt colder than expected, grounding him in the moment. The silence around them wasn't threatening. It was the kind of quiet that came when people were too tired to pretend they weren't afraid. Ayana broke it first. "What'll he do if he finds us?" Elias weighed the question carefully before speaking. "Depends on who he works for. If he's part of the group that attacked your camp, he won't leave quietly. And if he isn't, then we'll find out." Sana returned from her watch point. "There's dust rising far south," she said. "Could be wind. Could be him." Elias stood, scanning the horizon through the thin breaks in the trees. The dust was faint, too far to identify, but close enough that they needed to make decisions quickly. "We rest only a short time," he said. "When the sun drops lower, we move toward the foothills." Ayana frowned. "That direction is rough. It's safer than staying exposed here." Yara stepped forward, her voice steady. "Nita can walk if I support her." Nita, though visibly drained, lifted her chin. "I'll keep pace," she said. Her voice trembled but held determination. Elias gave a small nod, respect, not reassurance. Before they prepared to leave, he inspected the surrounding ground again. He found something half buried at the base of the nearest cottonwood, a strip of cloth caught on a jutting branch. Brown, stiff, stained with dried blood. It matched none of the women's clothing. Ayana saw his expression shift. "From the woman who passed here? Likely. Do we follow her?" Elias shook his head slowly. "She went in the opposite direction of safety. If she's alive, she's too far. If she isn't, there's nothing we can change." The words felt heavy on his tongue. He hated choosing logic over instinct, but protecting the 4 women already in his care left no room for losing time on a trail that led only deeper into danger. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Elias helped secure their belongings, adjusting the straps so Nita wouldn't feel the weight while walking. The group gathered in a tight formation beneath the trees. Sana waited at the edge, eyes fixed south, jaw locked with dread she refused a voice. Finally, Elias gave the signal. "We move." They stepped out of the grove and into the harsh light again. The landscape stretched wide and unforgiving, yet there was a growing steadiness in the way they moved. Different strides, different strengths, but one direction, one purpose. And as Elias walked at the front, he understood something clearly for the first time. He wasn't guiding strangers anymore. He was committing himself to their survival, not as an obligation, but as a choice. Even if danger was closing in, even if the land offered no shelter, he was staying, and in staying, everything about him was slowly changing. The heat eased slightly as they left the grove behind, but the ground ahead only grew more uneven. The foothills rose in slow, jagged waves, covered in loose rock and dry brush that snapped under their boots. Elias adjusted his path constantly, steering them through patches of firmer soil and avoiding slopes that would force Nita to climb at bad angles. Every decision cost time, yet moving too quickly risked breaking the group apart. Behind him, the women fought to keep a steady rhythm. Yara kept one arm around Nita's back, guiding her over stones and dips in the ground. Nita tried hard not to lean too heavily, but the pain in her wrists and the strain of days without proper rest tightened her breathing until each inhale sounded sharper than the last. Ayana walked close to Elias, her eyes shifting between the trail ahead and the sky behind them. She didn't speak unless necessary, but the worry pressing along her brow deepened with every step. Sana stayed at the rear again, her attention pulled between the open land they had crossed and the faint dust cloud slowly thickening on the horizon. By the time they reached the first crest of the foothills, the sun had begun to sink, turning the rocks around them a dull copper. Elias stopped long enough to let everyone breathe. He scanned the trail behind them and saw the dust more clearly now, closer than before. "He's still coming," Sana said quietly. She didn't raise her voice, yet the tension in it settled over the group instantly. Elias studied the distance. "Not fast," he said. "He's tracking careful. Doesn't want to miss signs. So he thinks we're close," Ayana replied. "He knows," Elias corrected. "The canyon hid our footprints, but he'll notice fresh gravel where we climbed out." Nita flinched at the thought of being found, not dramatically, but with a small inward pull that she couldn't disguise. Yara placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "We go on," Elias said. "There's a ridge ahead with rock shelters. Just need to reach it before full dark." They continued upward. The climb grew harsher as the land shifted from rolling slopes to broken shelves. Elias slowed his pace, choosing paths that minimized the risk of injury. But each step required balance and effort. Even he felt the burn in his legs, though he kept it hidden. The women pushed through without complaint, but exhaustion carved deeper lines on their faces. When they reached the second ridge, Nita stumbled for the first time. Her knees buckled. Yara caught her immediately, lowering her to the ground with controlled movements. "I'm fine," Nita insisted through strained breath. "Just slip." Elias crouched beside her, his voice low. "Your legs are shaking. That's not just a slip. I can keep going," she whispered. "You will," he said, "but not like this." He removed the small pouch from his saddlebag and took out strips of cloth. He wrapped them around Nita's ankles and lower legs with practiced efficiency, creating support where her muscles had begun to fail. She watched him with parted lips, her eyes filled with quiet embarrassment that softened when she realized he wasn't judging her. "It'll steady you," he said. "Not perfect, but enough." Nita nodded once, holding back the emotion rising behind her eyes. Ayana watched the exchange silently. She took in Elias's focus, the gentleness in his hands, the lack of frustration in his tone. She exhaled slowly, easing some of the pressure she kept on herself every hour since the camp fell. They resumed the climb. The ridge shelters finally came into view, 3 narrow indentations carved by wind and time, deep enough to hide them from distant sight, but not comfortable enough to stay long. Still, it was the best protection the land offered before nightfall. As they approached the shelters, Elias caught something on the ground, a dried smear of blood on a rock ledge, thin but recent. It wasn't from any of them. He motioned for the group to stop. "Ayana," he said quietly, pointing toward the mark. She examined it closely. "From the woman who passed the water?" "Could be," he replied, "or someone else crossing the foothills." The idea that another wounded traveler had come through unsettled everyone differently. Sana stiffened immediately. Yara moved closer to Nita, instinctively shielding her. Ayana's expression hardened as she pieced together scenarios. Elias tightened his grip on his rifle. Whoever was kept moving. "We don't follow their trail." Sana frowned. "What if they come back?" "They won't," Elias said. "Not in their condition." He led them into the deepest of the 3 shelters, a pocket of stone where wind couldn't reach. The ground was uneven but safe. The women settled themselves in positions where they could rest without exposing their silhouettes to the trail below. Ayana and Sana took the first watch at the entrance. Yara helped Nita stretch her legs, guiding her through slow breaths to ease the tremors. Elias remained just outside the shelter long enough to check the trail again. The dust cloud had grown larger. The rider was closing in. Not tonight, but soon. He returned to the shelter. Ayana met him with a quiet question. How long until he reaches us? Tomorrow if he rides early, Elias said. Later if he loses our trail again. And if he brings others? Elias paused. Then we'll have to move differently. Ayana held his gaze, reading more in his silence than in his words. You've led people before, she said. Long time ago. Not so long that you forgot how. He didn't answer. Instead, he sat near the wall, close enough to hear breathing settle into slow rhythms, far enough not to crowd anyone. Night came quickly. Cold air swept down from the higher ridge, filling the shelter with a chill that made the women draw their blankets tight. Even exhaustion didn't bring peace. Each of them slept with tension in their posture, ready to wake at any sound. Elias stayed awake long after the others drifted into uneasy rest. His thoughts turned over the landscape, the rider, the injured traveler, the women in his care. He weighed every route he knew, every danger ahead, every choice he had made so far. For the first time since leaving the ruined camp, he felt the pressure not as a burden, but as a commitment he no longer tried to resist. Their survival was now tied directly to his decisions, and that truth steadied him more than it frightened him. Dawn arrived without color, the sky a flat gray that blended into the foothills as though the land were holding its breath. Elias opened his eyes before the others stirred, the cold of the stone shelter gripping his joints. He moved slowly to avoid waking them, stepping outside to study the ridge below. The air carried a faint, distant vibration, too soft for hooves, too steady for wind. It was the quiet signal of someone moving deliberately across dry land. He scanned the horizon. The dust cloud from yesterday had shifted, stretched, and now gathered in a concentrated line. The rider had found their general direction. He wasn't close enough to see them, but he was close enough to narrow the distance. Ayana stepped out beside Elias, her arms folded against the cold. You saw him? She asked. Not the man, Elias replied, but the trail he leaves. How soon? Hours, Elias said. Not minutes, but not a full day. Ayana didn't look frightened, but her breathing changed slightly, a small acknowledgement of danger settling into her chest. Inside the shelter, Yara was helping Nita to her feet. Nita tried to mask the strain by tightening her jaw, though her legs trembled when she shifted her weight. Sana checked the ground near the entrance for fresh tracks. Her eyes narrowed in a way that suggested she didn't trust even the earth beneath them anymore. Elias gathered them at the mouth of the shelter. We move through the northern ridge, he said. There's brush heavy enough to hide us and a dry stream bed that leads west. It's slow, but it's cover. Sana shook her head slightly. If he rides hard, he can reach that stream before we cross it. Yes, Elias said calmly. If he guesses right. They didn't waste time. The group filed out, moving in a tight line along the uneven ridge. The ground dipped and rose with unpredictable angles, and at several points Elias paused to help Nita navigate drops she couldn't handle alone. Yara stayed beside her with unwavering focus, adjusting her steps to match Nita's stumbles, never leaving more than an arm's length between them. Ayana kept to Elias's side, her gaze scanning ahead for anything out of place. A broken branch, disturbed dust, fragments of ash or cloth. She had survived by reading land as well as people, and her instincts sharpened every time the terrain changed. Sana remained in the rear again, watching the ridge line for movement. She held a stone in her hand, gripping it the way someone might hold a weapon when nothing else was available. Her fear didn't paralyze her. It turned into a rigid alertness that kept her eyes sharp and her steps anchored. By late morning, they reached the dry stream bed Elias had mentioned. a long ribbon of cracked mud and scattered stones stretching between low, sloping walls. The stream bed's path curved west and disappeared behind a set of boulders that offered brief cover. Elias motioned for them to enter. "Stay close to the walls," he said. "Wind covers noise here." The air inside the stream bed felt cooler. The tall embankments cut off some of the sky, turning the path into a narrow corridor that forced the group to walk single file. It was safer than open ground, but it also meant no easy escape if someone approached from either end. Halfway through the first bend, they heard its sharp, rhythmic impacts echoing faintly across stone. Hoofbeats, distant but closing. Sana froze. "He's coming." Ayana's voice dropped. "How far?" Elias lifted his head, listening. The echoes bounced along the walls, making distance difficult to judge, but the steady rhythm told him the rider was pushing his horse hard. "He's trying to catch sight before we disappear in a rock again," Elias said. "He's too close to stop here." Nita's breath quickened, and Yara tightened her grip around her waist. "How far until the ridge opens?" Yara asked. "Not far," Elias replied. "But we have to move." They hurried forward. Every step sent loose gravel scattering. The sound felt too loud, too obvious. Elias could feel the pressure building in the space between each hoofbeat, an invisible countdown tightening around them. Then the worst sound reached them. Hoofbeats changed direction. They shifted sharply, angling toward the ridge above the stream bed. "He's going to look down into it," Sana whispered, her voice thin. Elias grabbed the nearest stone wall and pointed to a narrow split in the embankment, a small, sharp incline hidden behind brush. It wasn't a real path. It was erosion carved by storms. But it was the only way out before the rider gained the height advantage. "Up," Elias said. "Now!" Ayana scrambled first, gripping roots and loose rock with urgent precision. Yara pushed Nita toward the incline, supporting her as she climbed on shaking legs. Sana stayed at the bottom, scanning the ridge for the rider's silhouette. The hoofbeats grew louder. Dust flickered above the stream bed. The horse was close enough that they could hear its heavy breathing between strikes of its hooves. "Go, Sana," Elias ordered. She hesitated, then obeyed, climbing behind Nita. Elias was the last to move. He climbed quickly, pulling himself through the narrow split just as a shadow crossed the ridge above them. A single figure appeared on horseback, pausing to survey the stream bed from a height advantage that would have revealed anyone still below. The women froze, breath held, bodies pressed low against the ground. Elias flattened himself behind a cluster of brush, rifle against his chest, ready to fire if the rider spotted them. His pulse hammered beneath his ribs, not out of fear for himself, but for the people lying silent beside him. The rider remained motionless for several seconds. He scanned the stream bed, then looked across the ridge. His posture was rigid, focused, familiar to Elias, someone trained to read land carefully, someone who didn't guess without evidence. Then he turned his horse slightly and continued east, still searching, unaware that the group lay hidden only a short distance below. No one breathed until the hoofbeats faded completely. Sana pressed her hands against the ground, her voice barely audible. "You'll come back." Elias nodded once. "Then we stay ahead of him." Ayana looked at him, exhaustion and trust mixed in her expression. "Where do we go now?" Elias pointed toward the broken rise in the land. "My homestead is still days away," he said. "But once we reach the higher foothills, he'll lose our trail. After that, we'll have ground advantage." Yara supported Nita again as they rose to their feet. "And until then?" she asked. Elias adjusted his rifle and began moving toward the western slope. "We stay moving," he said. "We outthink him. We stay unseen." The women followed him without hesitation. Behind them, the ridge settled into stillness once more, yet the shadow of the rider lingered in every breath they took, reminding them that survival demanded more than endurance. It demanded trust, coordination, and the sharpest instincts each of them possessed. The sun fell behind the foothills long before they reached higher ground, and by the time Elias stopped, the sky had darkened to a deep blue with only a thin band of fading orange on the horizon. He led them into a sheltered dip in the land where thick brush pushed up around scattered boulders, the kind of terrain that hid sound and broke silhouettes. His shoulders finally eased a fraction, not because they were safe, but because this was the first stretch of land all day that didn't expose them fully to the rider's line of sight. "We stay here tonight," Elias said, scanning the area again before lowering his rifle. The women stepped into the clearing with slow, cautious movements. Their exhaustion showed differently now, less in their bodies and more in their eyes. Ayana surveyed the terrain with the precision of someone measuring risk. Yara helped Nita onto a smooth patch of ground and loosened the bindings on her legs with careful, steady hands. Sana circled the perimeter, never allowing the darkness to swallow more than she could track. Elias knelt near a cluster of brush and gathered a few dry stems. He broke them slowly, listening for hollow snaps. The wood was brittle, but it would burn hot and fast, too visible. He dropped the stems and shook his head. "No fire," he said. "Smoke's too easy to see from high ground." Nita exhaled heavily. The drop in temperature had already tightened her shoulders. Yara wrapped the blanket around her, pulling it close until the shivering eased. Ayana stepped beside Elias. "How close is he now?" "Closer than I want," Elias admitted. "But he's lost our exact trail. He'll scout the stream bed until he's certain we left it. Then he'll climb," she said. "Yes." Her expression didn't shift, but the tension in her posture grew sharper. She was thinking the same thing Elias was. Night would hide them, but sunrise would take that advantage away unless they left before first light. As the darkness settled fully around them, the sounds of the foothills became clearer. Crickets chirped in irregular bursts. The wind moved through grass with a soft hiss. Somewhere far off, a lone coyote gave a long, broken call. For a moment, the world felt strangely normal, as if danger belonged in the distance rather than at their backs. Elias sat near the rock wall and began cleaning a cut on his hand, a wound he hadn't noticed earlier. The motion steadied him. He used routine to keep his mind clear. Ayana joined him, sitting with careful distance. She watched the way he wiped dirt from the cut, the way he tightened the cloth with quiet efficiency. "You've done this many times," she said. "Years of work," he answered. "Too many places where stopping wasn't an option." She hesitated before speaking again. "You weren't just a guide for the army." "No," Elias said. "Not always." Her eyes sharpened. "You've seen what men like the one chasing us can do." "Yes," he said. His voice carried no boast, only memory. Ayana let the silence stretch. She wasn't seeking sympathy, just understanding. "So you took us because you knew what it meant to leave us." "I took you," Elias said quietly, "because I couldn't watch another camp fall apart and pretend walking away wouldn't matter." For the first time since they met, Ayana's expression softened. "Then you carry weight the rest of us don't see." Before Elias could respond, Sana appeared at the edge of the clearing. Her movements were quick, but her voice stayed low. "There's someone far off," she said. "I saw a flash on a ridge. Could be reflected metal." Elias stood immediately. "Direction southwest," she said. "Too far to tell who." Ayana rose beside him. "Do you think it's him?" Elias studied the slope, eyes narrowing. If it was, he would stay moving. "Whoever this is stopped." That was worse in a different way. He crouched and drew a rough map in the dirt. What lay behind them, what lay ahead, and where the unknown figure might be positioned. "If he's not the rider," Elias said, "he might be the person who left the blood trail at the water." "A wounded traveler?" Yara asked. "Possibly," Elias said. "But wounded travelers don't climb ridges at night." Sana's breath caught. "Then who is he?" "A scout," Elias said. "Or someone searching the foothills for survivors. Either way, we don't want to meet him in the dark." He wiped the map away and motioned for them to stay low. The women crouched immediately. Even Nita, weak as she was, followed the movement with determination. The night stretched on without another flash of metal, but the uncertainty settled heavy in the clearing. Every sound became sharper. The brush shifting, the far-off animal calls, the scrape of a pebble underfoot. After a long interval of quiet, Ayana turned to Elias. "What happens when we reach your homestead?" Elias looked toward the black horizon where the faint outline of mountains formed a jagged boundary. You'll have walls, he said. A roof. Stored grain. Water from a fixed well. Tools. Safety for a while. And after, Elias said slowly, you decide whether you stay. Ayana considered him carefully. Would you want us there? Elias didn't move, didn't break eye contact. I wouldn't have taken you this far if I didn't. A quiet shift passed through the clearing. It didn't erase fear, but it changed the way the women held themselves. For the first time since fleeing the destroyed camp, there was something beyond survival, something like possibility. The cold deepened. Nita leaned into Yara for warmth. Sana took position on the western side of the clearing, Ayana on the eastern. Elias remained awake between them, grounded by the responsibility he had accepted and the decisions ahead. The group settled into an uneasy rest, half sleep, half alert, knowing dawn would force them to move again before the rider or the unknown man on the ridge closed the distance. And for the first time in days, hope and danger felt equal in measure, balancing on the thin line of a single night's silence. The sun fell behind the foothills long before they reached higher ground, and by the time Elias stopped, the sky had darkened to a deep blue with only a thin band of fading orange on the horizon. He led them into a sheltered dip in the land where thick brush pushed up around scattered boulders, the kind of terrain that hid sound and broke silhouettes. His shoulders finally eased a fraction, not because they were safe, but because this was the first stretch of land all day that didn't expose them fully to the rider's line of sight. We stay here tonight, Elias said, scanning the area again before lowering his rifle. The women stepped into the clearing with slow, cautious movements. Their exhaustion showed differently now, less in their bodies and more in their eyes. Ayana surveyed the terrain with the precision of someone measuring risk. Yara helped Nita onto a smooth patch of ground and loosened the bindings on her legs with careful, steady hands. Sana circled the perimeter, never allowing the darkness to swallow more than she could track. Elias knelt near a cluster of brush and gathered a few dry stems. He broke them slowly, listening for hollow snaps. The wood was brittle, but it would burn hot and fast, too visible. He dropped the stems and shook his head. No fire, he said. Smoke's too easy to see from high ground. Nita exhaled heavily. The drop in temperature had already tightened her shoulders. Yara wrapped the blanket around her, pulling it close until the shivering eased. Ayana stepped beside Elias. How close is he now? Closer than I want, Elias admitted. But he's lost our exact trail. He'll scout the stream bed until he's certain we left it. Then he'll climb, she said. Yes. Her expression didn't shift, but the tension in her posture grew sharper. She was thinking the same thing Elias was. Night would hide them, but sunrise would take that advantage away unless they left before first light. As the darkness settled fully around them, the sounds of the foothills became clearer. Crickets chirped in irregular bursts. The wind moved through grass with a soft hiss. Somewhere far off, a lone coyote gave a long, broken call. For a moment, the world felt strangely normal, as if danger belonged in the distance rather than at their backs. Elias sat near the rock wall and began cleaning a cut on his hand, a wound he hadn't noticed earlier. The motion steadied him. He used routine to keep his mind clear. Ayana joined him, sitting with careful distance. She watched the way he wiped dirt from the cut, the way he tightened the cloth with quiet efficiency. You've done this many times, she said. Years of work, he answered. Too many places where stopping wasn't an option. She hesitated before speaking again. You weren't just a guide for the army. No, Elias said. Not always. Her eyes sharpened. You've seen what men like the one chasing us can do. Yes, he said. His voice carried no boast, only memory. Ayana let the silence stretch. She wasn't seeking sympathy, just understanding. So you took us because you knew what it meant to leave us. I took you, Elias said quietly, because I couldn't watch another camp fall apart and pretend walking away wouldn't matter. For the first time since they met, Ayana's expression softened. Then you carry weight the rest of us don't see. Before Elias could respond, Sana appeared at the edge of the clearing. Her movements were quick, but her voice stayed low. "There's someone far off," she said. "I saw a flash on a ridge. Could be reflected metal." Elias stood immediately. "Direction? Southwest," she said. "Too far to tell who." Ayana rose beside him. "Do you think it's him?" Elias studied the slope, eyes narrowing. If it was, he would stay moving. Whoever this has stopped. That was worse in a different way. He crouched and drew a rough map in the dirt. What lay behind them, what lay ahead, and where the unknown figure might be positioned. "If he's not the rider," Elias said, "he might be the person who left the blood trail at the water." "A wounded traveler?" Yara asked. "Possibly," Elias said. "But wounded travelers don't climb ridges at night." Sana's breath caught. "Then who is he?" "A scout," Elias said. "Or someone searching the foothills for survivors. Either way, we don't want to meet him in the dark." He wiped the map away and motioned for them to stay low. The women crouched immediately. Even Nita, weak as she was, followed the movement with determination. The night stretched on without another flash of metal, but the uncertainty settled heavy in the clearing. Every sound became sharper. The brush shifting, the far-off animal calls, the scrape of a pebble underfoot. After a long interval of quiet, Ayana turned to Elias. "What happens when we reach your homestead?" Elias looked toward the black horizon where the faint outline of mountains formed a jagged boundary. "You'll have walls," he said. "A roof. Stored grain. Water from a fixed well. Tools. Safety for a while. And after, Elias said slowly, "you decide whether you stay." Ayana considered him carefully. "Would you want us there?" Elias didn't move, didn't break eye contact. "I wouldn't have taken you this far if I didn't." A quiet shift passed through the clearing. It didn't erase fear, but it changed the way the women held themselves. For the first time since fleeing the destroyed camp, there was something beyond survival, something like possibility. The cold deepened. Nita leaned into Yara for warmth. Sana took position on the western side of the clearing, Ayana on the eastern. Elias remained awake between them, grounded by the responsibility he had accepted and the decisions ahead. The group settled into an uneasy rest, half sleep, half alert, knowing dawn would force them to move again before the rider or the unknown man on the ridge closed the distance. And for the first time in days, hope and danger felt equal in measure, balancing on the thin line of a single night's silence.